Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for the Motus Wildlife Tracking System webinar. This webinar is in collaboration with the Mushkegowuk Council Lands and Resources in Birds Canada. For those who don't know me, my name is Hope Hill, and I am the Carbon and Biodiversity Project Coordinator with Mushkegowuk Council. And today I am joined here with Birds Canada, Erica and Clea, and they will provide us a presentation on the Motus Wildlife Tracking System. This session will be recorded, so if you're not able to stay for the whole time, or there's those who are not able to join us today, they are able to find this recording later on the Mushkegowuk Council Lands Resources Facebook page and YouTube channel. There will also be a question and answer period at the end of the presentation, but you're welcome to use the chat function and at the end during the question and answer period, you're also able to raise your hand and unmute yourself to ask some questions. So with that, I will pass on to Erica. Thanks.
Thank you. Can you see my home screen okay, or my main slide?
Yeah, looks good.
Great. Hello, everyone. I'm here to talk about Motus Wildlife Tracking System. Mushkegowuk Council recently began participating in this research network as part of their efforts to protect important habitat for birds and provide opportunities to train staff and educate youth on these research methods. And my name is Erica Geldart, and I am the wildlife tracking biologist on Birds Canada's Science in the North team. I also work closely with the Motus Wildlife Tracking System, a collaborative program led by Birds Canada and supported by researchers and partner organizations across the network. And with me today is my Birds Canada colleague, Clea Flapin, who is the conservation and monitoring biologist in Northern Canada. And I get the pleasure to work closely with Clea on several projects, including Motus, and especially Mushkegowuk's Motus and Shorebird initiative. And Clea is going to help me answer questions in the chat today, and she'll be providing links, so keep an eye out for those. So getting into it, bird population changes tell us how birds, and by extension their habitats, are doing. And Birds Canada and partners published a trend analysis 2 years ago on the state of Canada's birds to show how Canada's bird populations have changed. And while some have grown in the last 50 years, others have declined dramatically. And in particular, Arctic birds, long-distance migrants that migrate all the way to the tropics, shorebirds, aerial insectivores, and grassland birds have all presented drastic declines. And knowing this, it is important that we continue to monitor the movement, behavior, and population of birds, as this may tell us where and when birds may be running into issues and where we need to focus our efforts. So before I get into the specifics of how Motus Wildlife Tracking works, I'm going to briefly walk you through different ways we can track the movement of animals. And in particular, all of these methods are especially useful for tracking birds. So first, the most simple method is to act as detectives and find signs of animals having been in an area. And this can be anything from scat, tracks, nest material, fur, feathers, shredded skin, the sound of an animal, and so on. And using this method, you can often identify species, but you can't identify an individual. An exception being able to follow tracks from one point to another until that pathway breaks, like you see with the willow ptarmigan on the right. But who that individual is to begin with, we wouldn't know. And this data can typically be submitted to shared data archives and used for large-scale research and public education, like some of the applications on the bottom left there. Next, you can relatively easily attach visual markers with unique identifiers, such as bands with different alphanumeric codes or color combinations to birds and other animals. And these methods vary depending on what is most comfortable for the animal and what questions you are trying to answer. So to identify individuals, flags and color bands can often be read using a scope or binoculars, whereas metal bands need to be retracked to read the very small print on those bands. And these methods are inexpensive and minorly invasive, but it relies on humans to report observation. And as you can imagine, marked individuals are very unlikely to ever be seen again, let alone retrapped. Next, we have radar, where electromagnetic waves are emitted from an antenna and pulses. And when it hits something, such as the biomass from aerial animals, then some of the energy from these pulses is reflected back to the antenna. And with this method, one can gain information on the number of flighted animals and the direction that the animals are traveling in the air, but it cannot detect unmoving animals, nor can we distinguish species, let alone the individual, using this method. And this sort of migration data can be collected over a large scale at little to no cost, since this can all be accomplished on pre-existing radar stations that are widely used across the globe with the original purpose to gather weather data. Another thing we can do is take tissue samples from animals, such as blood, feathers, or claws, and analyze specific elements to determine where those tissues were grown. So as you can imagine, elements from the environment are stored within tissues of animals which feed on resources in that environment. So their tissues can be used as fingerprints to identify where the animals were when those tissues were grown. And this method can determine an animal's history after being trapped just once, but it is labor intensive, it's difficult to implement, and results are not very precise. Next, the use of audio recorders is another tracking method that can collect large quantities of data, as recording units can be set out and collect data automatically. And you can distinguish species from the sounds of the birds and get an estimate for the count of individuals, but you again cannot distinguish individuals themselves this way. Another challenge is data management because it is so much data and it's very time consuming to analyze. And so deep machine learning has been used to help, but it should not be relied on. And here I have some raw data that my colleague Thomas is working on. And this is the spectrogram of bird sound. On the top it's raw, and on the bottom is where he annotated the different species that he was able to identify. So these are 4-letter codes. You can see American redstart, Magnolia warbler, black-throated blue warbler, for example. So next I'm going to move on to electronic devices that can be attached to birds. So first, light level geolocators are externally attached and use light exposure to estimate an animal's location based on sunrise and sunset times across the globe. They therefore provide location data anywhere in the world as long as there's adequate light exposure. So this doesn't work great in the poles where you have 24-hour nighttime or daylight. They're also not suitable for nocturnal species. And geolocators, they're light enough so that they can be attached to even small songbirds, and they are relatively inexpensive. But one challenge is that animals must be recaptured to collect the data, as the data is stored on the tag itself. So devices like this work best for animals with high fidelity to an area, meaning that they return to the same area year after year. Next, GPS tags. They receive signals from satellites to pinpoint a location. And many store location data internally, just like the last tagging device. So GPS wearing animals also need to be recaptured to collect data stored on the tag. And GPS tags provide very accurate location data and can collect data any time of day, anywhere in the globe. However, they're some of the most expensive options, and they are very energy demanding in order to be so precise. So they require a large battery and are not light enough for all flying animals, such as insects. So here we have tracks from the lesser yellowlegs, and the green tracks actually were tagged in James Bay. Next, satellite tags. They send information to a system of satellites, and then the satellites transmit the location of the tag back to receivers on the Earth's surface. So satellite tags can detect animals anywhere. However, they are very expensive and are too heavy for nearly all small songbirds, and especially bats and insects. But you are able to get that data from receivers rather than from the tag on the animal, and so the animal does not need to be recaptured. And finally, there's radiotelemetry, which consists of a tag on the animal that sends information through radio waves to a receiver station. And with this method, you can only track animals that come within a range of a compatible receiver, and detections are stored on the station, not like the tags that we previously discussed, so you don't need to recapture the animal to get the data. And although detections do not provide location information, location can be inferred and estimated based on the signal strength of that detection and which of the multiple antennas they were picked up on, and what is the direction and detection range of that antenna. It's also notable that radio telemetry offers some of the smallest available devices. So some can weigh as small as 0.2 grams. So they can be put on animals as small as large insects, such as dragonflies, bumblebees, and butterflies, as well as they are usually cheaper than all the other tag types mentioned. So this table is just to show that there are pros and cons to each of these methods. And it's really about picking the right method for your study species and the questions that you want to answer. And spoiler alert, for the duration of this presentation, we are going to talk about radio telemetry. But I just want to show you how, in some ways, they fill knowledge gaps that other methods cannot accomplish, but in other ways, they have their own unique set of limitations. So to summarize, radio tags telemetry can track very small birds. Some of the smallest birds are songbirds, and they can track animals as small as large insects. They cannot track animals anywhere. They can only track animals where there are stations. They can track individuals, so we know we can follow one individual throughout time. It cannot detect animals that have not been handled by people. You do have to capture the animal at least once to put the tag on, but you do not need to recapture the animal to get the data. It's a moderately cheap price because there is technology that you need to purchase, and you get the location data on the receivers. So that brings me to the Motus Wildlife Tracking System, which I'll be calling Motus for short. Motus meaning it's Latin for movement. So Motus is an international collaborative network that uses automated radio telemetry to simultaneously track hundreds of individuals of many species of birds, bats, and insects. And the collaboration component can occur since tags deployed by one project can be picked up by receiver stations set out by a different project. And all the data are part of Motus and integrated into one database, which can be shared across research groups and summarized and visualized by the public on the Motus website. Motus therefore allows a community of researchers, educators, organizations, and citizens to conduct research and education on the ecology and conservation of migratory animals. So there are two physical pieces of technological equipment needed for Motus to work, being the stations and the transmitters. So starting with the stations, in the middle here is a map containing all the Motus stations as of recent. So Motus started in 2014 out of Nova Scotia and Ontario, and it quickly expanded across North America, into South America, and even into Europe, Asia, and Australia. And there are three necessary components to building a working Motus station. So you have the antennas, which receive the signal from the tags, and they need to be tuned to the right frequency that the tags are also operating on. And then you have the receiver. So the antennas send the signal down through coax cable to the receiver, and the receiver stores the data from the tag. And then you need some way to power the station, whether that be existing AC outlet or solar panel. So pictured here are several Motus receiving stations. They all present different methods of constructing the towers depending on the infrastructure you have available, but they all have those same three main components listed before. So perhaps in the left, perhaps you need to build a tower to get that height for the antennas. Then there are methods to build the tower. And if you have infrastructure nearby where you want to put the station, you could bracket that tower to the building. But if there is no infrastructure, perhaps it's a remote location, then you can anchor this tower to the ground. Perhaps you have a flat roof, you could then, but you don't want to put holes in your roof, you could put what's called a non-penetrating roof mount. And that is weighted down with blocks or sand. But if it's a windy area, that's not robust enough for some climates. Maybe you have permission to use existing communications tower. In that case, you only need to attach the antennas to that existing tower. Also, there's variety in whether or not you have access to existing power, but if not, if it's more remote location, then you can use a solar panel and battery setup. So as you can see, we can get quite creative with how we construct these stations, and And there's lots of instructions online, and all of this equipment can be purchased and kind of assembled by anybody. So next you have the radio transmitters, which you'll also hear me referring to as tags. And as you can see by this map, radio tags have also been deployed on animals all across the globe. And what is special about Motus is that tags use digitally encoded radio tags, meaning that the signal transmitted by these tags contain a special code, which uniquely identifies the device and therefore the individual. And because tags are distinguished this way, they all share the same frequency. And this is unlike the older style beeper tags. That's distinguishing feature was their unique frequency. And so receivers used to have to constantly be cycling through different frequencies in order to pick up multiple tags. But because our tags share a frequency, they can be used in large-scale studies where a large volume of tags are deployed and detected all at once. Motus itself, it offers several tag varieties to satisfy a range of research objectives. So you could use battery powered tags, which have a limited lifespan. You could have solar powered tags, and those can only track animals during the day when it's receiving sunlight. Or you could get tags that are a combination of both. There's a solar panel, but there's also a backup battery, and these tags can last indefinitely, and they are for more long-term studies. And as you can see here, radio tags are typically attached externally to the animal using either a glue or a harness. So it's important to mention that our goal with Motus is to minimize any potential impacts of tracking devices on focal species. So we want to ensure and promote animal welfare and reliable scientific information. And I helped with a literature review a couple years ago about the impacts of tracking devices more generally. So it's not just about Motus tags, but also about those other tracking devices we talked about earlier in the presentation, and found that many studies found little or no measurable effects, or effects varied by characteristics of the individual, such as the species, ecological attributes like whether or not the animal was breeding or not breeding, or what the environmental conditions were during tagging, or characteristics of the tag itself, like size or the attachment method. And there are animal care and ethical guidelines out there that use this research to create them. And it is important that studies follow these guidelines. So for example, there is a guideline that the weight of the tag must be less than 3 to 5% of the bird's body weight. And this is shown to have negligible effects on the animal. And some considerations when creating a tagging project is the size of the tag. It should be smaller than the guidelines allow, but also as small as you can make it to answer your study questions. So if you're only doing a short-term study that doesn't require a large battery, then you could use a smaller tag on that animal. And tag attachment should also be the most comfortable option for the animal while maintaining retention until the study is over. So for example, glue is used for short-term studies because it will fall off during molt, whereas harnesses are used for longer studies that can last from months to years. And there's even varieties within harnesses. So there's some harnesses that will fall off, will start to degrade with UV sunlight, and those will last for months, or there are harnesses that will last for over a year. And sample size should also be reduced to the number needed to accomplish your study so that you are affecting a very small portion of the population that you're trying to study. And radio tagging provides valuable information about migration, habitat use, survival, and conservation needs. And researchers should weigh the potential costs to the individual birds against the benefits of obtaining that information that can help protect populations in the species. And we encourage researchers to remain vigilant while working with animals and perform more studies on the impacts and even report their observations, including whether there are effects on the animals and even when there are no effects, so we can improve best practices and continue to evaluate the cost and gains related to conducting research. So for the rest of this presentation, I'm going to zoom into Motus in Western James Bay area. So southwestern coast of James Bay, Ontario is an important site for thousands of shorebirds to stop over to rest and refuel during their long migration south. And Motus has been present in James Bay since 2016 as part of the James Bay Shorebird Project, which was a large collaborative project to identify important habitats and their use by shorebirds in southern James Bay. And data collection for this project, it ended in 2019, but Mushkegowuk Council is reestablishing shorebird research and monitoring in this area to contribute to the long-term protection of the migration habitat in the region. So mapped here, just zoomed into a map of all the Motus stations, but the yellow lobes represent antennas that are on the stations that currently exist in the region. And that shows the direction that and the range that the antennas are covering. In pink here, we have some prospective Motus stations that are either planned and hope to get set up soon, or that are on our wish list. But this is an ever-growing list. We're excited to say, and it'll be really great to get more coverage in this area. So first, I'll start with the Moosonee station. So Motus started in 2014. So Moose Cree's participation by having a station in Moosonee began early in Motus's life when they put the station up in 2016. It was one of the many stations that contributed data to the James Bay Shorebird Project that happened during that time. And because of its placement on Northern Lights Secondary School, it added an educational component for the students. And it is still at the school and going strong and will continue to contribute to the important work going on. There's also plans, we're working with Christine Nielsen and Don Tichu to set up a Motus station at the Moose Factory at the Dolores Ecom Composite School so that we can have the same kind of impact and outreach with the kids. So also pictured on the bottom right is a temporary pop-up tripod tower. And these were set out on the coast of James Bay back in 2016 time. And these stations were meant to be set up and taken down as they cannot withstand the harsh conditions that they get year round, especially on the James Bay coast. So we have since improved our methods for more remote standalone stations and hope to install a few in the near future. So next we'll go to a goose camp belonging to David Friday Jr. and David Friday Sr. On the Chicken-Neck River. And this is a really important remote station that we set up as it'll be right next to where we plan to be doing some shorebird tagging. It is powered by solar panel and battery. The battery and receiver are inside the camp to protect it from potential curious polar bears. And the day after that, we set up a station in Kasheshuan at the St. Andrews Elementary School. This station was a monster to build. It was the tallest station I've ever helped build. And so we were very lucky that some construction workers that were working on the gym at the school gave us a couple hours of their time to help us lift the station and attach it to the building. And just last week, I got to travel to Fort Albany to help set up the Motus station at the office. So Deputy Chief Sutherland and Chief Nakaji, we can thank them for agreeing to host this station at the band office. And this station is right next door to the school. So we're hoping that the kids will get to continue to interact with it. We can also thank the Fort Albany Power Corporation and community member Mishan Sutherland for helping us set up this station. And I should mention that you'll notice Vicki and Edward are in each of these photos as they have spearheaded this work. And Clea as well got to join on these trips. So next I'll go into some of the tagging that Mushkegowuk is leading. So Mushkegowuk Council purchased and sent Motus tags down to Delaware Bay to be set out by shorebird tagging professionals in the area. And the idea here is that the tags that they're set out in the south will hopefully eventually get picked up at some of the stations in James Bay. And with this, you'll be able to answer questions on where these shorebirds came from, what route did they take to get there, what time did they arrive in James Bay, and how long did they stay. And so on the right here, you can see that some of these shorebirds have already left the United States and they have entered Canada, and we are just hopefully waiting for them to arrive in James Bay soon. Next, it's exciting to announce that Mushkegowuk Council will be setting out Motus tags in the James Bay area. The purpose is to protect species at risk, such as lesser yellowlegs and Hudsonian godwit, but also important places for staging shorebirds. So while these two species can be a little elusive and hard to catch, there will be effort to tag them, but also smaller, more abundant shorebirds like semi-palmated sandpipers and semi-palmated plovers. And by tagging birds locally, you'll be able to look at where the birds spend time when they are stopping over in James Bay, how long they stay there, and then you'll be able to see their migration back south to their wintering area. And finally, we're hoping that having Motus in the area will contribute to youth education. So it was done at Moosonee back in 2016, where lessons about bird migration and research methods such as Motus was integrated into the curriculum. So there's possibility for students to explore the Motus data on the computer, or we could do work in the field, so demonstrate tagging or manual tracking. In fact, just last week, my colleague Thomas and Hope, they were doing the BioBlitz in Fort Albany, and they brought the kids over to the new Motus station. It was only 1 day old at that time, and they showed them the station and they showed them the website and how they can explore the data. So here I'd like to show how Motus can be applied to answer different research and conservation questions. So these are just a few examples, but Motus can answer questions on flight metrics such as the speed that birds are traveling, how far they are traveling in a single bout, or how far long is their migration. You can look at more local movements, so their activity patterns. So how much time are they spending moving around to maybe forage or to prospect for other sites versus resting. And you could also look for migration strategies. So how long are they stopping over in an area to rest and refuel? How many times do they stop along their migration? What triggers their departure from a location? Maybe they're taking advantage of good weather. And you can look at their migration route. You can see what sites are important and which ones need to be protected. You can even infer sometimes survival. So for example, annual survival sometimes is inferred by whether an animal returns to the same site the next year, or by detection probability on the stations. You can sometimes link an animal's from one point in the animal cycle to another point. So where you can link a population where they breed to where they overwinter. And you can look at all of these questions and compare it to different anthropogenic and environmental changes and how those influence it. So I'm just going to speak on a few different pieces of research that were involved James Bay. So this group of researchers wanted to understand how red knots migrated differently in the spring and the fall. So to do this, they attached Motus tags to two groups of birds. One group was tagged in the spring at Delaware Bay in New Jersey during their journey north to their Arctic breeding grounds. And then another group was tagged in the fall in southern James Bay after their breeding season and as they began their journey south towards their wintering area. And the researchers found that the red knots completed their spring migration faster than they did their fall migration. And although the birds actually flew faster when traveling south in the fall, they spent more time stopping along the way to rest and refuel. And these longer stopovers that therefore made their overall southward migration take more time. And the difference in migration strategies, they're thinking that it may be linked to the birds' seasonal priorities. So in the spring, red knots are racing to reach their breeding grounds on time, but they also need to arrive in good physical conditions so that they can successfully breed and raise their young. So as a result, they appear to balance their speed and conserving enough energy for the breeding season ahead. And then in the fall, after breeding is complete, the pressure to arrive quickly to their wintering grounds is lower. So researchers think that the birds may fly faster between stopovers to stay ahead of migrating predators, while also taking longer breaks to rest and rebuild their energy reserves during their journey south. Another group of researchers used Motus to study a number of different shorebird species. They're listed and pictured in this slide. They tagged these species during their fall stopover in James Bay, and they compared their migration behavior between 2 years. So 1 year there was average wet, dry conditions, and the other they had moderate drought. And in the drought year, what they found was that birds were more likely to take another stopover in North America after departing James Bay. And so they did not, this is instead of doing one long nonstop flight all the way to South America. And this was true for most species that they studied. This was also linked with lower invertebrate abundance when there was drought, which are the prey that these items eat, as well as these birds ingested a diversity of prey when there was drought. And this suggests that they had to adapt to lower numbers of their preferred prey and try out other animals. They also had lower refueling rates, so they were not gaining fat as quickly. And first-year juvenile birds had a shorter stopover duration. So these results, they demonstrate that there are carryover effects of having drought on their migration behavior, and it has implications for climate change, which is estimated to cause drier conditions in the Canadian subarctic. And finally, these researchers compared migration behavior between whimbrel that breed in 2 different latitudes, different sexes, and nest success. So to do so, they tagged whimbrel breeding in a more northern latitude in Churchill, Manitoba, and whimbrel breeding in a more southern location at Burke Point, Ontario. And they found that the northern population departed breeding area later than the southern population, as was expected, since they had a longer migration distance ahead of them from Churchill, and therefore they may require more fuel. And they found no effect of nest outcome on timing of post-breeding migration. All the individuals likely stayed around the breeding site after whether or not they had a failed or successful breeding attempt to forage or to prospect for next year's nest site. Finally, they found that males were less likely to be detected after leaving the breeding area. And this could be because of differences in migratory routes, such that males, they take more over ocean routes where there are no Motus stations, or perhaps there are differences between the males and females in their molt strategies. Since these tags were attached with glue, they fall off during molt, and so perhaps males simply molted earlier than females. So quickly, I'd like to chat about what it takes to host a Motus station. The fun thing is that anyone can host a Motus station, but we do have some suggestions for what makes a good site. So first, an unobstructed line of sight for the antennas is probably the most important thing. They can reach distances 15, 20 kilometers with an unobstructed line of sight. But if they are pointed straight at an obstruction, then that can reduce their signal. So this is usually the highest point on the surrounding landscape without any trees or buildings blocking that view. Filling a gap in the network. So because the antennas can reach 15, 20 kilometers, we usually suggest that stations are at least 20 kilometers or more away from the nearest station. It's always great when these stations complement a tagging project in the area. In fact, a tagging project isn't as successful without its accompanying stations to get those detections. But it is still helpful to have Motus stations even when there is no tagging in the area, as you can get detections from birds that were maybe tagged south coming northwards. You just have less of a chance of getting detections that way. Having a building or existing infrastructure to attach equipment to that lowers the cost and makes the station more robust. Having existing AC power, it adds reliability to the power and it reduces the cost compared to a battery solar panel. Internet is, we call it a bonus because it allows the data to be automatically sent to the Motus database. And so somebody doesn't need to go in and manually download the data. And that just allows people to get the data earlier and also identify any issues. Yeah, and ease of access to the site, it reduces the time and the travel costs. But of course, these birds sometimes most times are in very hard to access sites, so it is hard to avoid sometimes. And next, I would just want to point you to the Motus website. There's lots of information there, but also all of the Motus data has been summarized and is on the Explore pages. So you can go on there and you can pick a station. You could pick a project. So this project we're talking about today is it's called Albany River. You could pick a species you're interested in, or you can zoom in on a region. So I encourage you, when you have time, to play around on the Motus website. And this is an example. I chose the Moosonee station of what the detection data can look like. So these are detections primarily of shorebirds that were tagged in their northern breeding or stopover areas in the late summer, whether that be James Bay or in Churchill, or in their southern stopover during spring migration. So that was mostly Delaware Bay, South Carolina. So yeah, we're hoping that the other stations we set up and the ones we set up in the future will be as successful as this one. And with that, I'd like to thank you and welcome any questions. My contact is here, so you can always reach out later as well.
Great. Thank you, Erica, so much for the presentation. I learned a lot as well. So thank you. And thank you to Clea for providing some useful links in the chat. Like Erica said, we would like to open up the floor to any questions or comments you may have. Feel free to put them in the chat or simply raise your hand or unmute yourself and we'll see if you have any questions.
Hi, I have a question for Erica. It's Don Cheecham, the principal of Dolores Cheecham Composite School, and I'm sorry that we couldn't get the antenna up when you first came up. The community was evacuating, and all the resources were being geared to the evacuation process. But are there any plans for you to come up again, or when that would be?
Yeah, for sure. That was totally understandable that we couldn't work out that time. But we definitely hope to come as soon as we can to help you set up that station. You have everything you need in terms of equipment. And we've been talking on our team about reaching out to try to set up another time with you and your staff. That works best for you. So we should follow up on that.
Yeah, the sooner you follow up or give us a time, then we can prepare for your because we got to get that man lift thing. We have to get that from a local contractor and stuff like that. We got to work out those logistics before you even arrive.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we'll reach out soon and we can plan that. I know we also have a potential remote station to set up with you guys.
Yeah.
So whether or not we can do them at the same time or maybe have to be separate because they both have their different schedules to work around.
Yeah. Right.
Christina?
Excellent presentation, Erica.
Thank you.
And so DDEX has been working with Nature Canada with their shorebird curriculum. And like one of the big aspects is not to take the curriculum and put Mushkegowuk knowledge within it. It's to develop the curriculum with Mushkegowuk knowledge, right? Like two separate point of views. So I'm wondering with the curriculum, well, one, does Nature Canada have curriculum? Or two, is there the potentiality of co-developing curriculum with these schools that you're working with from that Mushkegowuk point first?
Right. Yeah, I think that it'll be about co-developing. We do have some resources to educate youth online already, but those are very computer-based, and I think I can see potential for there being more field-based transfer of knowledge. And so I think that it would be great to approach it as a collaboration. It's also been, these resources are a bit older and a bit more outdated. So, take some of those resources and use them, but also expand on those so that they fit how the students like to learn.
Okay. And then with the like another form of capacity building, what is the pathway for individuals here to have whatever licensing that is required to do the banding and or installing the Motus? I think if we can develop a really clear pathway, it will encourage a lot of potential future eco-scientists.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess I'll start with the stations. Stations, you don't technically need any certification, but it is a learning curve. So I guess working when we, Birds Canada or other people who've set up Motus stations come to help set them up, making sure that it's a training opportunity and not just a quick install, it's done, one-time thing, but that knowledge is being transferred to those people who will likely want to set up more stations. And sort of having a local champion who it becomes the Motus station installer and maintainer. Of course, Birds Canada is always going to be there to support remotely and can keep making those trips to set up more stations, but it's great to have that expertise grow locally. With tagging, there is a bit of regulations, so you do have to get a banding and tagging permit. And that comes with proving that you have the experience to tag. And so at the beginning, you will have to work with somebody who already has a banding permit, and they can train. And just the more bird handling and tagging banding and tagging you do, the more you can build that resume and submit for a banding permit yourself. So again, it's working very closely with the people who will probably carry these projects on long term.
So how do we start doing that now? Like in my mind, there's a couple of people I think would be awesome in doing this. How, I think waiting once a year for either Nature Canada or you guys to come up is not enough, right? To build that resume. Are there some specific programs that maybe we could fund together and support to build that capacity?
Yeah, well, one of our objectives in Birds Canada has been to offer banding and training workshops, but it's really on a case by case what our collaborators need. So we should chat, and we have in the past, we've had people come travel to us and we've shown them how to catch birds, band and tag, where we have kind of worked with and have experience with, but then also we've traveled to them. So I'm thinking of, we've gone to Labrador, and they had the expertise on where the birds were, and we could show them how to do all that on their land. So we offer those two types. Also, yes, we will let you know if there's any planned or bigger opportunities to have groups come and learn, but it's really about making a plan one-on-one with you guys on what you need and kind of catering to that.
Okay, so maybe put it on your list of things to do to go with
Yeah.
the latter option up here, and I can help you coordinate that. And I think if we reach out to all the First Nations and people, we could probably it would be economically feasible for your programming. Yeah, next steps for sure.
Yeah, I think it's something we should, when we think about coming and helping with stations, maybe we can try to pick times that are good for when you have an abundance of a certain bird, like snow bunting, for example. It didn't work out last time, but trying to link station and tagging at the same time, or education and tagging.
Absolutely. Okay, good. I'm looking forward to that.
Great. Thank you for your questions, Christina and Dawn. Does anyone else have any last questions? I'm not seeing anything in the chat, and I don't see any hands raised. So I think with that, we'll wrap things up and get some time back to your day. But again, I just want to say thank you to Erica for a great presentation and Clea for her support with the webinar, and everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Again, this session has been recorded, so it will be made available on the Mushkegowuk Council Lands Resources Facebook page and YouTube channel shortly, so that you can refer back to it. So with that, I hope you guys all have a good day, and thank you for joining us. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.